Longplay 4K Review, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault is the most neglected case among shooters with broken self-identity. Now it pokes you in the face with a bayonet, leads squads of clever opponents into battle, making a natural meat grinder out of routine jungle defiling, and a moment later smiles with 32 shader teeth, languidly breathes a breath of aviation alcohol and innocently asks if we want to ride on the rusty rails of movie gameplay. Apparently, for 2 years the authors have not managed to decide what exactly they are developing, a military simulator or a simple shooter for pimply teenagers. Aloha, Hawaii. The war begins, as it should, with the proper noise and pathos. A minute ago, Marine Tommy Conlon was driving around in a convertible, showing the base of Pearl Harbor, created to flicker serpentine bright images and grease to perish in the flames of Japanese bombing, and now he is carried along the burning pier, scares away flocks of skittish Zeros and saves the whole battleship from sinking. He performs heroic feats, acts breaking doors to cabins suffocating from smoke sailors, and observes the most spectacular bacchanalia in the history of the genre. The water, made in the latest fashion, reflects the black smoke spewed by the doomed ships. The constant machine gun fire turns the picture into an obscene blur of vision. Dozens of planes roar through the air, extras fall from the tilted decks, and the delightfully three-dimensional explosions harmonize favorably with the sepia-colored sky taken from Michael Bay. For 10 minutes we are not so much participating as looking around, like a dazed tourist. Our fingers are clutching the mouse, our lungs are actively gaining air for another portion of WoW, and the military cacophonic orchestra named after December 7, 1941 is raging in the speakers. If EALA doesn't do well with shooters, they can switch to producing 3D arcades for amusement parks. Homeopathic dose of interactivity, tons of effects, non-stop action. Silly, but addictive. It's almost a real war. When Conlon and his companions set foot on the sandy beach of Makin Atoll, Medal of Honor drops its mask and reveals its true nature. Walking in the thick grass, hysterical bonsai, villages swarming with enemy soldiers, where you should definitely blow something to shreds. The sublime pathetics of Pearl Harbor will fade away, giving way to the harsh everyday life of a Marine in the distorted cold color filter beauty of the jungle. Pacific Assault is a serious step of a series towards liberation from the yoke of scripts. The developers suddenly discovered that the clever eye entertains much better than disposable swarms of bushes, and endowed it with an impressive arsenal of tricks. Enemies still work as cannon fodder, but we no longer feel like a bipedal roller crumpling everything in its path. They know where and how to hide, skillfully fire from cover, do not hesitate to retreat, coordinate actions with colleagues, with bayonet ready to throw themselves into the psychological attack and selflessly cover themselves with grenades. Plus, impossible to believe, can't see through the thicket. For the first time in the history of the series, Medal of Honor forces us to fight not by brazenness and memory of events, but by skill. It didn't do without punctures. In one of the first missions the game will regularly send trucks full of armed sushi lovers to your rear until Tommy and company guess to go 20 steps in the right direction. Infamously exploding, the truck dissolves before the eyes of the shocked audience, along with corpses and derelict weapons. The meager repertoire of random remarks of the patrolman is also surprising. After the 5th consecutive conversation on the subject of the weather, the hand itches to shoot the talkers. Meanwhile, the designers insist that death comes from 3 or 4 shots to the chest or 1 to the head. It's nonsense, of course, but we don't advise you to rush headlong, throwing out half a gun at the enemy. It is better to be a sniper. The jungle is big, but there is nowhere to run to. By limiting themselves to 3 locations, Makin, Tarawa, Guadalcanal, that's all the stops, the fleeting PX doesn't count. The authors have driven themselves into a dead end. Atoll is a small place, there's no place to put a Hollywood show. Closed areas fall away in the semi-finals, everywhere, solid greenery, and only a ride on a bulletproof jeep somehow dilutes the monotony of sweeps. Here the designers should have slowed down and thought, White to starve the player with a series of identical missions in the name of historical accuracy. After all, it was possible to study more carefully stripped to the bone Viet Cong and change the structure of the game, expanding the range of tasks. Cut down the bad sprite forest and replace the boring route corridor, base, village, corridor, further everywhere with real open spaces, and the technology allows, and the entourages are nice. Bring the world to life by attaching the Havok physics engine to all objects, not just where houses and crates fall apart in the scenario. After all, you have to compensate for long loading levels and unjustified breaks with something. Alas, Eala had a different opinion. We need more arcade inserts. No, it's not about stand behind a machine gun and send 100 more bonsai to the heavenly samurai, although there's plenty of that here, too. Do you want to defend a flimsy airfield hangar from bombers, shooting down attackers from an awkward, inert anti-aircraft gun? Or, sitting in a rubber dinghy, shooting a couple of Borscht Zeros with a bar, realizing that the price of a mistake will be the n,000th quick load? What if you get walled up in the cockpit of a fighter flying with the agility of a rotten Zaporists and are left alone with air defense batteries and crowds of hardened aces, and then asked to finish off 2 ships? Ideas for the level of some Operation Blockade are quite normal. Airplanes are drawn wonderfully, 3-dimensional sound takes your breath away. But Pacific Assault doesn't fit it. The Incredibles. Immortals are already among us. You can't kill your partners. Not at all. Even unrealistic, where the pristine screen is not clogged by aiming and life, patron counters, the killed squirm in feign agony, clutching a healing supermarket to their chests, and call for a doctor. Dutifully rushing to the call, he examines the patient, vomits picturesquely to the side, makes passes with a syringe, and returns the fighter to the ranks. Risen from the dead leaps to his feet and runs away into the heat of battle, not forgetting to praise Tommy for every Japanese shot. Good morning, Viet Cong. Conlon is less fortunate. He has 4 refills per level, first aid kits are strictly on holidays, and bandages only stop bleeding. Luckily, this innovation can be turned off. If the doctor is busy, please crawl away and wait, because there is no other help. Actually, we're the only ones who need a doctor. During one of the raids, my entire squad was crushed by a massive fuel tank. After thinking about it, I decided to finish the mission alone, and I was shocked when in a couple of minutes I found my comrades safe and sound, who managed to crawl out from under the rubble and teleport after the leader. And you say, the Philadelphia experiment. The unit that never existed. That's why the praised Pacific Assault plot melts away, leaving a couple of funny lines and the American flag proudly flying over the defeated headquarters in Tarawa. Behind the good animation, staged voices and well-cut costumes there is nothing but names. We see the matchless facial expressions, expressive eyes and manly faces with square jaws, but we don't feel the characters. We don't care what happens to the brave foursome around the next corner. Who are you, Private Frank Monoso? Why, despite the abundance of polygons, do you seem flat, like a giant mutant flounder? Who's to blame for this, the bad lighting that constantly turns the models into animated pieces of cardboard, or the concept itself? Even if the screenwriters could do the impossible and find the right strings to make us empathize with the heroes, immortality and amoeba-like storyline would undermine their efforts. In combat, though, the goons don't put a finger in their mouths. The system of orders, hastily screwed on with a glance at brothers in arms, go forward, cover me, gather in a bunch, retreat, is dusty and idle. The electronic McLeods of the U.S. Army, endowed with persistent immunity to death, inhuman eyesight and a head on their shoulders, do without other people's hints. Waiting for a miracle. Not a bad game, marred by monotony, overzealous attempts to eliminate it, and attempts at dramatic depth. Those who still have World War II, Vietnam and fiddling in tropical vegetation out of their ears in the morning can stop and feel the exhibit. The rest pass by in the hope that sooner or later EA will put the device on the teenage audience and discover the real values: freedom of action, good story and balanced gameplay in all respects. and the excellent soundtrack is sold separately. P.S. If you got Medal of Honor Pacific Assault Director's Edition, you can safely add 5 points to the final evaluation: a slideshow of military posters from the 40s, a documentary about the veterans of the Pacific Front, and interesting facts popping up in the course of the game are worth it. Do you know how Gremlins and the expression "the whole 9 yards" were born? P.P.S. Some readers are indignant why we don't mention the network modes in the review of this or that shooter. The answer is simple: because there is nothing to tell. 9 maps, 3 modes: Deathmatch Normal, Deathmatch Team, and Objective gameplay in the spirit of Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Lag after the patch, moderate, a separate dedicated server traditionally not brought. The probability of gaining cult status, somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.